We tend to choose different films based on what we want to experience. Romance films invite us into a fantasy of love, where emotions feel heightened and relationships seem magical. Action movies are built to deliver adrenaline, a spectacle, and a thrill of danger. Comedies allow us to relax, unwind, and laugh. Science fictions open the door to imagination, letting us explore new worlds, future technology, and an alternate version of reality. Each of these genres leave the audience with a sense of satisfaction, a feeling of excitement, wonder, comfort, or joy. But horror is different. Horror is built around a feeling that, in almost every part of our lives, we try to avoid. Fear, discomfort, unease. And yet, despite those negative emotions, the horror genre remains one of the most beloved and enduring genres in cinema. Fans love the feeling of suspense, seeing the reveal of the killer, seeing their motives. They brace themselves for the sudden shock of a jump scare or the unbearable tension of a quiet hallway where nothing happens, until it does. Audiences can't wait to see the violence and the gore, which raises an interesting question. Why do people enjoy it so much? Why do audiences willingly sit through these experiences? What is it about being scared that keeps people coming back? Part of that reason might be because it allows the audience to experience fear in a controlled environment. The danger feels real in the moment, but somewhere along the way, in the back of our mind, we know we're safe. Horror taps into curiosity. Would you be able to do what the characters are doing? Can you survive the scenario? Which raises another interesting question. If audiences have become so familiar with the rules of horror, what happens when those rules suddenly change? Like any genre, horror has developed its own set of expectations over time. There are rhythms, patterns, and unspoken rules that the audiences have begun to recognize the more horror films they've watched. These conventions create a silent agreement between the film and the viewer. But what happens when a film starts to quietly dismantle the very rules that the genre is built on? Somewhere along the way, you begin to realize that you might not be as comfortable with horror as you thought you would be. That is the kind of experience offered by the film Funny Games. Funny Games, directed by Michael Haneke, follows an ordinary family, Anne, George, and George Jr., as they arrive at their summer house for what should be a peaceful vacation. But that calm is shattered almost immediately when two young men arrive at their doorstep and gradually take the family hostage, turning their quiet retreat into a chilling nightmare of psychological terror and home invasion. At first glance, the film seems like it might follow the familiar path of a horror story. But just as the characters gradually take control of the family, slowly Haneke changes the question you might have, and he turns the mirror back on the viewer, asking, are you comfortable with this violence? Are you okay with watching what's about to happen? This idea appears in a moment when one of the young men tells Anne that,
why don't you just kill us?
You shouldn't forget the importance of entertainment.
The fact that someone could say something like this in the middle of a horrifying situation is incredibly cruel and strange in the moment. At first, the line feels like it's simply revealing the twisted and psychotic nature of these characters. But there's a lot of juxtaposition used in this film used to throw off the audience. It isn't only that scene that shows the audience a unique opposition. There are many tools that Haneke uses that show this as well, like when he uses the color white. Throughout the film, you see Haneke use the color white a few times, like with the summer houses and especially with the young men. In many horror films, the color white can be used to enhance the atmosphere of fear, and it works within the expectations of the genre rather than against it. In The Shining, the overwhelming whiteness of the snow creates a sense of isolation, trapping Jack in a cold, empty space where escape feels impossible. In Halloween, Michael Myers' pale white mask removes all emotion from his face, turning him into something blank and inhuman. And you could say the same thing with Jason's mask in Friday the 13th. But in Funny Games, white functions very differently. Instead of building tension in a familiar way, Haneke uses it to disorient the viewer. The young men are not hidden in shadows or framed as obvious threatening figures. They are fully visible, dressed in clean, bright clothing that makes them appear ordinary, polite, and completely exposed. There is nothing about them, at least visually, that signals an immediate danger. The young men in white makes us put our guard down, and that is what makes how they act even more unsettling to the viewer. Haneke uses other tools to continue this feeling, like when he uses long takes. He sometimes doesn't cut to a different perspective or a different scene. Instead, he forces us to sit in the scene for extended periods of certain points. The camera lingers for almost too long, forcing us to remain in the moment with the characters. Instead of cutting away from the suffering, the film traps us inside of it. The audience sit and watch the suffering of the family, but the way Haneke shoots it, it removes all the thrill of waiting and suspense from a horror film and replaces it with suffocating, awkward silence. Like the scene of Anne sitting in the living room after one of the men fires the gun. The camera doesn't move to give us answers. It feels like Anne might be the only one who survived the attack, and we're left with her, sharing that same confusion and unbearable stillness where something terrible has just happened. Even within awkward silence, the boys are still in a playful mood. Their remarks become quite unsettling. This unsettling commentary becomes even more clear through the strange, almost absurd references the young men make throughout the film. They refer to themselves using the names of comedic characters, like Beavis and Butthead or Tom and Jerry.
One for Beavis, one for Butthead. Okay, Tom. Okay, Jerry.
These are characters audience normally associate with harmless entertainment and playful conflict. Yet here, those references appear throughout the acts of cruelty and psychological torment, and they're not told for us to laugh along. They're not jokes we find funny. The casual way these young men have fun while inflicting pain creates an abnormal contrast. Haneke intensifies awkwardness and discomfort through the way he presents violence in the film as well. In most horror movies, violent moments are shown directly to the audience, often with dramatic music, editing, and visual spectacle. But in Funny Games, the camera frequently refuses to show us the act instead.
Don't want to hurt the kitty cat, right?
Leave him alone.
Instead, we are left to hear it. The sounds of struggle, pain, and suffering occur off-screen, while the camera lingers elsewhere or just blatantly hides it. This choice forces the audience to see the character's reaction and imagine what is taking place, making the experience even more uncomfortable because we cannot visually process or distance ourselves from it. And the noise aren't small or barely hearable as well. Instead, they almost peak the audio at certain points to worry us about the situation and the condition of the family. One of the most devastating moments in the film demonstrates this perfectly. As Peter and Paul continue their twisted game, Peter suddenly shoots. But it doesn't show who Peter shot. Instead, we hear crying, sobbing. The shocking part is not just the act itself, but how Haneke delivers it. All of these tools or choices that the director used in this film can be shown in his original version of the film. In 1997, Michael Haneke released the original version of Funny Games, and a decade later he returned to remake it in 2007. But this was not a typical remake. Instead of reimagining the story, Haneke recreated the film almost shot for shot. The two versions are strikingly similar, unfolding with nearly identical scenes, dialogue, and pacing. This deliberate repetition was not a creative shortcut, but a purposeful decision. By reproducing the film so precisely, Haneke reinforced his commentary on the horror genre and ensured that the message would reach a wider audience. But why did Haneke use all these elements differently than they're usually used? By revamping all of the usual elements or characteristics of a horror film, Haneke constructs a film that constantly disables the viewer. Color, pacing, humor, framing violence, even recreation of the film is repurposed to make us uncomfortable while watching horror in the first place. As you continue the film, you recognize, instead of giving the audience the thrill they expected, Funny Games leaves them with something far more unsettling. The realization that the film might not just be violence on the screen, but about your willingness to watch it. And while I was watching the film, I was genuinely wanting to turn it off because I was getting upset. But again, that's the point of the film. It isn't supposed to have a satisfying story, it's supposed to make you feel uneased. But as much as we feel uneased in the film, the two young men feel the opposite while terrorizing the family. The film introduces us to Peter and Paul. Like I mentioned earlier, the two young men appear almost ordinarily at first glance. They're polite, soft-spoken. When Anne, George, and George Jr. arrive at their summer house, they greet the neighbors, and Peter and Paul can already be seen nearby. Their initial interaction with the family begins in a deceptive, harmless way. Peter politely asks Anne if he could borrow a few eggs, and Paul is introducing himself to George. But there seems to be something hidden within their action. They move with a strange curiosity that suggests preparation. They seem to survey the space carefully, studying it as they're looking around. Even small moments reveal their intelligence and control, like when Peter casually knocks Anne's phone into the sink full of water, disabling the family's ability to call for help. It's a quiet action, almost accidental in appearance, yet it reveals just how carefully they are manipulating the situation. Their demeanor slowly shifts, the politeness becomes strangely forced, and suddenly what began as a simple favor now feels like the first move in a carefully planned intrusion. What makes Peter and Paul even more unsettling is the mystery surrounding their motives. In most horror films, killers are usually given some kind of explanation, like revenge, trauma, or ideology. Even when the reasons are disturbing, they at least provide a narrative framework that helps the audience understand the violence. But Peter and Paul refuse to offer that comfort to the family and us, and even make fun of it as well when they are telling the story about a tragic backstory about their lives, suggesting some painful past that might explain their behavior.
His father divorced his mother when he was this big. Or another woman.
That's not true. He's lying.
Yet just as the story begins to sound sincere, they suddenly contradict themselves, laughing and changing the details.
We rob rich families in their charming vacation homes to support our habit. Come on, he's a spoiled little brat. He's jaded and disgusted by the emptiness of existence.
What initially appears to be a moment of emotional vulnerability is revealed to be nothing more than just a joke. By doing this, they openly mock the idea that violence in stories need a meaningful explanation.
I get it. Isn't that enough?
That's good. Hey, Tubby, he's got it. He gets it.
Their cruelty has no grand purpose. They simply are doing it because they want to. Their behavior throughout the film reflects this disturbing lack of purpose. While terrorizing the family, they casually talk to one another, place bets on what will happen, and even pause to eat or watch television. They treat the entire ordeal like a game, as if the suffering of the family is nothing more than a form of entertainment. At one point, they even discuss the idea that the family needs to put on a show.
We want to entertain our audience, right? Show them what we can do.
As if the violence unfolding is meant to be satisfying to us, the audience. The implication is chilling. This is not just about tormenting the victims, it is about performing violence for the sake of a spectacle. Throughout all of the boys' strange actions in the film, Paul appears to be the one constantly guiding their actions. There is a certain presence around him that feels as if he's almost attempting to establish a connection with the audience. At one point, while Anne is searching for their dog, wondering if Paul caused it any harm, Paul suddenly turns his head and stares directly into the camera. And if you're wondering, yes, he is directly looking at you. Not past you, not through you, but at you. In that moment, the barrier between the film and the audience collapsed. His gaze is not only unsettling, but strangely direct and almost inviting. This isn't a one-time trick either. Paul breaks the fourth wall repeatedly through the film. It is an incredibly unsettling moment because it reveals something terrifying about Paul as a character. He understands he is inside a movie. He knows the rules of the story, the structure of the narrative, and the expectation of the audience watching it. Paul behaves very differently from a typical horror villain. There are moments throughout the film where his calmness feels almost supernatural. But it's not because he has powers, it's because he already knows how the story works. Like when I mentioned earlier that George Jr. manages to find a gun, it's a moment in most horror movies that would signal a turning point for the victims. But when the gun is fired, nothing happens. There are no bullets. What's disturbing about this is that Paul never appears worried through this moment. Instead of reacting with panic or relief, he remains completely composed, almost amused. His attitude suggests that he already knew the gun wouldn't work. And in a sense, he did it because within the logic of the story, this was a moment that was never meant to save the family. Paul's strange awareness shows up in smaller details as well. Throughout the film, he repeatedly refers to Peter by different names, sometimes calling him Peter and other times calling him Tom.
I'm Paul. This is Peter. Just give Tom the eggs and we won't bother you anymore. Peter's afraid of dogs. Where's Tom?
On the surface, it might seem like a harmless nickname or a joke, especially since the two psychos frequently do this throughout the whole film. But the way Paul shifts between names feels deliberate, almost like he's acknowledging that the characters themselves are interchangeable roles in a kind of twisted performance. Even Anne noticed this inconsistency at one point, becoming visibly confused when Paul asks if she gave the eggs to Tom, only being aware of the name Peter.
Where's Tom?
Who?
Did you give him the eggs?
Excuse me?
The slip in identity creates another subtle fracture in the film's reality. But the most shocking moment of Paul's control over the story comes later in the movie. At one point, Anne manages to grab the gun that was originally never meant to save them and shoots Peter. For a brief second, the audience feels a surge of relief.
Because I think he's really shining the light on you as an audience member. He's making you aware of all the things that you're used to in films. You know, you're used to cheering on violence, he gives you that one moment where you do punch the sky.
We cheer for Anne for this moment and are excited that she got one of them. We're just now waiting to see how she gets the other one. But Paul grabs the gun from her and searches for something in the room, a television remote out of all things. And when he finds it, he simply presses a button and rewinds the film itself. The image literally moves backwards, undoing what just happened, erasing the moment of hope as if it never existed, deliberately mocking the audience's emotions and having us feel bad for rooting for a scene of violence.
And then you realize he's playing with you again, and then you go, oh. You know, you regret it. You regret that it didn't happen. You regret that you craved it. You feel guilty. You're very manipulated.
Later in the film, Anne comes across a knife, and it feels like despite everything she has endured, this might finally be the one thing that can save her. We hope that this is it. That if there was a moment for her to have a break, this was it. A knife that was seen earlier in the film that had no significance at first glance, but is now playing a huge factor. And as Anne is cutting her way through, guess who's the one to see it? It's Paul. Once again, the character who understands the rules of the story is already aware of every possible escape, every decision, every turning point, every fleeting moment where it seems like things might change. By giving Paul this level of awareness and understanding of the script, the genre, and even the film itself, he becomes something almost untouchable. A presence that isn't confined by the limits of the story, but instead moves through it with complete control. And because of that, Paul begins to resemble something far more familiar. He begins to resemble us. The way he engages with every event and interaction mirrors the way we do as well as an audience. We want to feel that shock, that dread, that disgust, the tension, anxiety, pressure, and relief when we watch horror movies. Going from next watch to watch, we continue to consume a lot of it, just like Paul going from house to house performing the same horrific acts. Audiences even strive for a specific story formula that works on them every time. When Peter and Paul casually stop to eat through the film, that moment feels almost absurd. Violence lingers in the air, and yet they sit there, calm, composed, carrying on with something as ordinary as making lunch. But in a strange way, an audience does the same. We watch suffering unfold, violence escalating. And just like them as an audience, we might make a snack to watch a horror movie. By the end of the film, Haneke isn't simply telling a story about a family being terrorized. He's holding up the mirror to the audience. Through Paul, he creates a character who understands the rules of horror just as we do as well. A character who seems to exist somewhere between the world of the film and the world of the viewer. That idea is reflected in Peter's story about Kelvin, a man trapped between two realities.
Okay, so where's your hero now? Is he in reality or is he in fiction?
His family's in reality and he's in fiction.
But isn't fiction real?
Why?
Well, you can see it in the movie, right?
Of course.
Well, and it's just as real as reality. Because you can see it too.
In many ways, Paul is Kelvin. He exists inside the fiction, but constantly reaches beyond it. He speaks to us, acknowledges us, and forces us to recognize our place within the experience. Whether you agree with Haneke's criticism or not, that's what makes Funny Games so memorable. It asks us to think why we watch it in the first place. Why do we seek out fear, suspense, violence, and suffering as entertainment? Why do we become so invested in who survives and who doesn't? Why do we continue watching even when we know exactly where the story is heading? And that is what makes Funny Games so unsettling. Long after the violence is over, long after Paul and Peter are gone, the questions they leave behind remain. The film never gives us the comfort or a satisfying resolution. Instead, it leaves us alone with our own reflection. Because by the time the credits roll, the most disturbing thing isn't what happened to the family, it's the realization that the film may have been about us the entire time.